smoking, those things disappeared overnight. So inevitably what ended up happening was that there was a call to move into the wilderness. There was thousands of people that got caught up in this. It ended up being a cult. It was called The Move. And so my dad was 21 and my mom was 19, and they had my oldest sister Joy. And they packed up everything they had, my dad's VW bus, and they drove to northern British Columbia. And they got involved in Shiloh Christian Farm. Shiloh Christian Farm located mile 109 on the Alaskan Highway, and in off the pavement, 30 miles. And this road was like a seismic trail. So it was a goat trail to get into this place, right? Huge valley. And there's 150 people there. And it started with the best of intentions. But over time, what ended up happening was that they didn't vet people very well. So the place was ripe with predators, child molesters. And the worst people I ever met in my life called themselves Christians, right? And I didn't realize until later on, until I asked somebody, I couldn't make heads or tails of why my daddy would have done that. And I said, and I asked this fellow, I said, how did we end up this way? And he said, listen, when you remove 150 people that far from society, he said, you got to create rule of law, right? The rule of law they found was in the Bible. But in the book, Jesus talks about false prophets. Beware of false prophets. And they got tied up with some false prophets. And they ended up being there for 17 years. So here's my childhood. From the time I was 8 years old, I was up at 5 a.m. We, like I said, there was 150 people living off the grid. We all had work groups. We're all assigned to different men. And I was in charge of milking cows. So I 7 days a week, twice a day, whether it was 50 below out or whether it was sunny. I got up at 5 a.m. and I milked the cows. I went to school, milked the cows at night. And I'm telling you, I don't know however many of y'all have milked a cow, but you can go in there tired and dragging a little bit. And when you get hit that first time with that wet, poopy tail right across the face, tell you what, you'll wake up. But here's the thing, right? Along with that, the way they controlled us is the fundamental principle that was taught to us right out of the gate is we were all born unworthy. And the only way we could find redemption in this life was through acts. So I became an approval seeker. I was afraid of authority figures. I had no identity, and I was born scared. And I was a hypervigilant kid. And from birth, I always felt like there was something wrong with me, something broken in my soul. And I knew it. And I started piling this stuff away because I didn't want anybody to see. I didn't want anybody to see my weakness. I don't want to see that time that, there's a couple of memories that I'll share with you here. The first time is, so we all lived in these log homes. We all ate together in the tabernacle. We ate 3 meals a day, school up top, church in the bottom. And so to survive up there in the middle of winter, you had to cut a lot of firewood. My daddy was a logger. So I spent time, the only memories I really had with my father was spending time in the woods with him, setting chokers for him. Anyways, we were out cutting wood one day. My daddy had these nice winter gloves, right? Got it in the military. And I said, Pops, can I borrow your gloves? He said, yep, make sure you bring them home. Well, I get out there, and one of the older boys was predatory up there. He came and took them from me, and there wasn't a thing I could do. So I go home, and I had to tell my daddy that. He was like, "Where are the gloves?" And I told him. And in a fit of rage, he grabbed me by the back of my neck, and pulled me outdoors, middle of winter. He pulled my pants down. He grabbed the first thing he could, which was a frozen extension cord, and he beat me till I couldn't walk. He left me out there crying and broken. That started a rage and a resentment towards my father that I hardly have words for. Hardly had words for. My daddy was never there to fight for me. My daddy was never there to protect me. I had 4 sisters. I was the protector in my family. My little sister Beth, rest in peace, was 10 years old. She was raped on that farm. She went and told my older sister. My older sister went and told my mom. My mom spanked her. Things weren't talked about. So we had all this trauma that we were building up in our soul. We felt broken and different. We didn't have a voice. We didn't have anybody fighting for us. We had false prophets teaching us the word. We're being sexually abused, physically abused, and mentally abused. But I didn't know any different. Shoot, I didn't live in a house with the flip-on switch until I was in 8th grade. Didn't own a TV, never seen that before in my life. Well, 1986, it comes time, and this place is falling apart. So my father had the courage to leave. And so we moved to Northern California. Now, my daddy came down here, and he had a truck and a gooseneck trailer with all our stuff on it, and he had $500 in his pocket. 5 kids, and he was 40 years old. All he knew was logging. He was working $10 an hour, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, just trying to keep it together. And the times were so stressful in the home. And I had 2 older sisters and 2 younger sisters, and I was always kind of the outcast, and I had nobody. And I'll tell you, the earliest memories that I had that kind of started reinforcing this mindset that I was broken and unworthy is I was lonely. I don't have words for the loneliness I felt in my soul. And I was different, and I was bullied because I didn't know. My first day in public school, that was a trip, man. That was a trip. And I didn't fit in. Well, yet again, my father had this work ethic that was unbelievable, and he passed it down to all of us, and he decided this was not going to be the place to raise the kids, so we moved to Oxnard, California. Shout out to Oxnard, California. And from there, Oxnard was a really rough place. It was like inner city LA. Gang violence and crazy stuff going on. So I was in 8th grade, and I was just getting bullied, and I was lost, and I was lonely, and I didn't have friends, and suicide that was really the first time that suicide started creeping in my mind. And I remember one day, this is a defining point for my father and I. I'd come back from junior high, and I had one of those days. You know those days that you just can't talk about? Breaking you, you're crying. You don't want to show any tears. I was barely holding on to my sanity, and my dad had this little company doing some imprinting, some silk screening. And so I'd go there and work. Remember, I was standing on the stairs, a little balcony, and my dad was giving me some direction, and I was barely holding on to my sanity. And my father felt like I wasn't giving him the attention that he deserved. And so he flipped a switch. And a father and a son, you can see it in his eyes. It was all that abuse that he had laid on me all those years, and that anger. And I said, this is the last time. And I threw that spray bottle on him, and I said, you and me outside, we're going to settle this once and for all. I walked out front, and I waited for my father, and he didn't show up. That was the first day I punked my father. I said, you're never going to lay another hand on me again. And the division that created in our life. He was so proud of he was so proud of me. Man, I'll tell you, people would come up and say, man, your dad is so proud of you. And I'm like, really? Man, I don't feel that. I don't feel that. I feel nothing but anger and resentment and bitterness. So I'm a big fella, and I started finding my way in athletics. I started finding my approval. Now all of a sudden I could go and I could dominate people. And I started to realize right then and there that I was going to dominate in order to avoid being dominated. And that's the mindset that I had in life. That's a mindset. And I would surrender only, protest only. I would rather die than surrender. I didn't know what that meant in my life. And that was the chip that I carried on my shoulder. But I was really driven. I spent my time in the gym. My goal was to be a Division I athlete. I wanted to play football. That was going to be my way out of this nonsense. I drank twice in high school, up until my senior year. And where I lived, there was gang violence and school shootings before gang violence and school shootings. And there was drugs and alcohol everywhere. And I always said no. No. And then one day my boy JT Skidmore comes up and says, hey, you want to go smoke some weed? I said, yeah, man. And that opened something up for me. Then a month later, he was like, hey, you ever tried cocaine? And then I started this battle with addiction. But let me take a pause here and let me go back to when I was 10 years old. My father, he ran a heavy equipment company, and he did some road grading. So we were out at this ranch in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It's kind of like the Yellowstone in British Columbia. And I was out there with some fellows, and they were not good men. And as sheltered and protected as I was, I saw pornography for the first time. And they said things and did things that scarred my little mind, that stuck with me, that I fight to this day. And I got this dopamine hit that I'd never experienced. I was like, that's addiction right there. So then when drugs and alcohol came into my life, not really alcohol, but when drugs came into my life, all of a sudden, all this insecurity, there's two parts in my soul. There's the exile and there's the true self. My exile is all this nasty stuff that I want to hide from you. Because I don't want Mr. Darren to know how broken I feel, how insecure I feel, how broken. The fact that I could never talk to a girl. The fact that I always felt weird. I could never share that. That's not a side that I wanted to show. Because if I did, I'd be abandoned. And the worst thing I had in my life was abandonment. And I did not want to recreate that. So I'd be whoever you wanted me to be. I had a fear of authority figures. I was an approval seeker. And I lost my identity in the process. So my identity was in athletics. Right up to the point where I started doing drugs. And it was, first of all, it was the life of the party until it was just a party of one. Party of one. And that cocaine habit took me down into methamphetamine. Talk about the unspeakable sins. I had some unspeakable sins that I was carrying around with me. Some things that happened to me and things that I had done the shame that I was carrying in my life, I did not have words for. And it was eating me up inside. Eating me up inside. But I would hide it. Every time I would take a hit, it would all go away. And I hid it from everybody. I was a hard worker. So I'd go to work and do my deal, and nobody knew I had an issue. Kept it on the down low. And then I was lucky enough to go to university. Didn't know how that happened. Didn't figure it was going to happen to me. My daddy always said I had a strong back and a weak mind. Figured I was going to end up in the trades, which is a fine profession. I wish I would have stayed in the trades, to be honest with you. but I decided to go to college. And, my addictions continued there, but I hid it. But the first good thing that happened to me in my life, talk about these little decisions that happen to you in your life that change the course of everything. You don't know when they come up. So it was my first year up there in Chico, and I was with my friend Kevin. They were out at the Chico State. It was a lively place. And before double days, we were going to go out to the bars. And this was August 6th. And we were either going to take a left on 3rd Street or take a left on 5th Street. We decided to take a left on 5th Street because there was a good burrito place down the way, and we were going to go get ourselves a little Mexican eat. Lo and behold, takes a left. There's a couple gals stumbling down the street. He knew them from the dorms. He said, "Hey, Diana, jump in the car. You're stumbling. I'll drive you home." Well, we get back to the house, and they invite me in, and I end up staying up all night and chatting with this gal. This is really the first person that didn't judge me and saw something in me, and I connected, and I ended up marrying that woman. If I had taken a left on 3rd Street, I wouldn't be here talking to you today, right? First real blessing that happened in my life was my wife. So, I go out and I get the job, we graduate, and everybody's got to go to the Bay Area and get these jobs, and I was an approval seeker, and figured that's what I needed to do. And after about 5 years of running that racket, I was burned out with traffic and everything else, and so we moved on. And we jumped around a couple times. During this period of time, my little sister, my sister Beth, she was in and out of recovery because she had some demons that she couldn't kick. And she went through 3 or 4 different recovery homes. She had 3 children with 2 different guys. She had my niece Solange, and then she had triplets. And she had triplets with this guy David, who was a Hell's Angel, a terrible man. Met him in recovery, and my sister was a beautiful, beautiful woman that had the personality. But it was one of those things, right, where we look to heal other people because we can't heal ourselves. You guys know what that means? Yeah? That was my sister, right? So she was such a beautiful girl, and the personality was just unbelievable, and I miss her to this day. People could suck the life out of her. She hooks up with this guy David, and they have triplets. Well, she knew she couldn't raise the kids. And so she puts them up for adoption. How the good Lord works. She found Lillian and Marcella, 2 Brazilian folks. They couldn't have children of their own. And she ends up searching them out and finding they're good Christian folks. They live back in Brazil now. They're Christian missionaries down there. And they adopted all 3 kids. And they put Marcelo down on the birth certificate so David could never come back and look at those kids. A year into this, so now I'm in California, a year into this, it was about time to terminate parental rights. And it just crushed my sister's soul. And we had just moved out to Louisville in 2007, March of 2007. I've been out here about 2 months, and I get a call. My dad's crying. He said Beth is gone. My sister ended up dying of an overdose on a dirty bathroom floor in a rehab facility. David left her there to die. She couldn't deal with the shame. She couldn't find forgiveness in her life. And it crushed. And it took one of the most beautiful souls that I'd ever known. And it crushed my father because he knew he felt guilty. It crushed both my parents. Well, the housing market imploded and they lost everything, and they were basically living in their warehouse. Mom was showering at the YMCA, but they were never home. My mom said, "We're not homeless. We're just displaced." They never took that mentality, and they were never victims. 2015, I said, "Pops, we can't do this anymore. Why don't you come out? We're going to start this little barbecue company, and we'll get this thing going." But in the back of my like in the back of my head, I like knew it wasn't going to work out, and I had real fear of that. And within they moved out, let's say in March, and by August, it was not working out. And one day my dad comes over to the house. And by the way, my wife and I couldn't have children I'm sorry, I'm going to be jumping around here a little bit. My wife and I couldn't have children of our own. And we didn't feel like in vitro fertilization was the path to go. And we knew what adoption meant in my family, so we went through the foster care system, and we started fostering 3 little people. My daughter Gabby, she came to us when she was 18 months old. And her mom was 14 when she gave birth to her, and she grew up in a crack house, and she had cigarette burns on her. She was a broken little girl. A month later, my little boy Leo was born, and he spent 2 months in the NICU getting clean from heroin and Oxycontin. A year later, my blessing little Granty boy came along, and he was born addicted. Not to the same level. So we fostered those little people for 4 years. So I was fostering, we were in the process of fostering kids. If you've ever fostered kids, man, the fear of losing these children is just something you don't have words for. And so, we were kind of trying to compartmentalize all these things in our life, and my father came in, and with his anger, and he had lost everything, and so he came over to the house one day in August. I was working a full-time job, and I was trying to get this company going. I was trying to be a father, and I was this, that, and the other. And my dad had a blowout. We had a blowout. We had a blowout of epic proportions. And it was one of those things that if my family wouldn't have been there, I would have killed him that day with my bare hands. I would have choked him, and I would have choked him out, and I would have watched the life drain right out of his face. That's the rage I felt to him that day. I had hatred that I did not know was in me, and I had a nervous breakdown. But nobody knew, so I was hiding those things. But it crushed my soul, and it happened one other time, within a 2-month period of time. And I was so broken. And I don't know if you've ever tried Googling, man, I am broken, what do I do? There ain't no Google return for that. And I didn't know where to go, and I didn't know what to do. And I was trying to keep my life together, and I was trying to hide it, this exile part of myself. And then one day I was on the road, and I went, and a friend of mine said, you got to watch this movie. It's called The Shack. You ever seen the movie The Shack? That was my father and I. That movie, I was sitting in North Carolina in the middle of nowhere in a hotel crying like a baby, feeling every beating that I ever took, feeling all the anger and resentment, feeling the loss of my sister, and it crushed me. But it crushed me in a good way. And I called my wife. I was telling her about it. And she made an offhanded comment that didn't mean anything but meant everything to me. She said, well, did you cry? Did I cry? I was crushed. Yet again, it reinforced that thing in my mind that there was nobody there that understood me. Nobody understood the depths of my heart. Even the woman that I loved laughed at it. And it broke my soul in ways that I don't have answers, I don't have words for. And I was on the road about 6 days. I'd driven about 2,500 miles, and I got home. And she had some family over, and we had a blowout. And this is June of 2017. And I dropped a couple expletives and said, I can't do this anymore. And I grabbed my gun, and I got in my car, and I went for a drive. And I didn't know what I was doing. But all I can say is that my world was starting to close down. And I was trying to find a spot. I was trying to find a spot where I wouldn't curse the ground by my death. That was the thought that I had. I finally found this place. I pulled into a parking spot. My wife was calling me. I was ignoring it, and finally I answered the phone. And she said, my dad's here. Just don't make a whole thing of this. I said, make a whole thing of this. Threw the phone across the room. I grabbed my gun. I put it to my head, and I pulled the trigger. And the gun didn't go off. That's a trip right there. That is a trip. My world went like this to this. I was like, wow, okay, we're going to start over again. But I couldn't tell anybody about it because I didn't know who to talk to about it. So I was suffering in silence, man. And so I took a leave from work and I spent some time in the woods. That was the wrong thing to do, by the way. By the way, if you ever find yourself in that situation, be careful about heading to the woods by yourself because you're going to have time by yourself. And so I ended up spending the Christmas of 2017 in a mental hospital. I checked myself in because I couldn't do it anymore, and I was gonna go again. My friend said, "Dude, don't do it. Stop what you're doing and go to the hospital and say, hey, I'm having a nervous. I'm gonna commit suicide." And I'm telling you what, a big man walks in there to a hospital facility, freaked out. Guess what? They don't know what to do with a fellow like me. Man, I'm telling you. And I sat in this room naked by myself. These people walking in on me like I was some criminal. They strapped me to a gurney. They drug my ass out. I said, man, we got to get a hold of this. But I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to turn. And so that year of 2018, I did the same thing, barely holding on to my sanity. I thought about suicide 75% of every single day in my life. I was just barely holding it together. And so then some addiction started coming back in my life because I didn't know what to turn. So I started self-medicating. I started cannabis. I started smoking weed all day long. Looking at pornography, anything to give me a dopamine fix, anything to take the pain in my heart away because I didn't know how to get rid of it. And man, when that demon, that generational demon takes a hold of you, that fella, you got to watch that guy. He'll catch you at your low moment. He'll put the boots to you while you're down. They don't fight fair. They put the boots to me when I was down. Well, a good friend of mine who was in the Special Forces for 12 years, and he was barely holding on to his sanity. He went to an organization called Save a Warrior. It was a suicide prevention program, and I went there. And there's a couple things I learned, and I got healing in 4 days that I did not expect. These guys didn't have any doctorates. They weren't nurses. They were just a bunch of vets and a bunch of guys that were committed to figuring this thing out. And here's the first fundamental thing that I started to learn in my journey. Is that in order to heal, we have to confess our sins. And we have to confess, you know that thing that you have in your heart that you swear you're not going to tell anybody else? We all got that. That thing that we did. Like the song Lakin sang, that unspeakable sin. That either happened to you or you did to somebody else, that baggage. Man, Monday, right after lunch, Jake Clark says, you have 10 minutes to tell your story. You know that thing? I was there with 9 other combat vets, man. And I was right in the middle. And I didn't know if I had the guts to sit up there and speak my truth. And I did, and I'll only tell the story once, and I won't repeat it tonight. But through my tears and my brokenness, I looked up, and nobody was judging me. Nobody was extorting me. All I got was love. And guess what? I realized right then and there, I wasn't terminally unique. And no matter what you're suffering with in your life, you're not terminally unique and you're not alone in your suffering. And it's not only you. We're all struggling. So the first fundamental principle is you have to find a few men where you can truly be known. Truly be known. That takes guts, man. Takes guts. Because you realize that you're not alone. And then you can stop hiding. And you can stop running rackets. You can let your guard down. I didn't need to be such a tough guy. I didn't need to be the smart guy. And so I kept on with this journey. And that was July of 2019. Well, in October of 2019, I was at work, and I get a call. And it was my dad again. He was crying. He said, Ron died. And Ron was my wife's, or my sister's my wife's father of her first child, Solange. And he also committed suicide. So I had two people in my family that had committed suicide, and I had a niece that lost both of her parents to suicide. And that, man, it just ruptured in me again. And I felt lost. And any progress that I felt like I had made, I went right back to zero. And I remember standing out in my backyard going, God, if you ever give me my heart and my mind back, I won't take it for granted another day of my life. I promise. Please just give me back my sanity. Because I had lost my mind. I said, just show me the way. Just show me the way. Just give me a map. Just show me the way. I'll follow it. Prayers aren't always answered overnight. Sometimes we got to be patient. We got to stay with it. We got to be tough sometimes. We have to be resilient. We have to have trust. So at the same time, I was still smoking weed all the time, and pornography was an issue in my life, and I was hiding all this stuff. And in May of 2023, last year, I was high. I was sitting at home. COVID was not a good thing for me. I thought it was going to be great, but then I was just in my room. I'm in my office all day long, smoking weed all day long, staying high just to keep my thoughts just away. And I was high, and I had my computer open, and I was looking at pornography. My son was sitting in right there. I said, what in the world are you doing? Something has got to change now. Now! I was at the end of myself. Finally came to the end of myself. And so I went downstairs in the basement and I clicked on the old YouTube. If you need an answer, just go to YouTube, man. You can learn how to build a house and learn how to quit porn. How to stop pornography. Watch this sermon, Life Church. Fantastic. Guy says, first thing we have to do is be honest with ourselves, and we have to confess our sins. I was like, oh, this is going to be a big one. So my wife came home, and I said, sweetheart, we got to talk. I didn't know how it was going to go, but I knew I couldn't live like this anymore. And I said, here's what I've been struggling with, and I've been struggling with it when I was 10 years old. The sexual abuse happened. My mind got broken. My mind was warped. I was addicted to the dopamine hit that I got, and I felt guilty every time I did it, but I would go to it again. And I said, man, my wife was silent. I said, I need to talk to somebody about this, and I didn't know who to call, so I called my daddy. Up to this point, we hated each other, and we couldn't even be in the same room together. But at some moment, I said, I got to reach out to my father. And I reached out to my father, and I just basically gave him a download on what was happening. And that was the first real conversation I ever had with my dad. It was the first time I knew what it felt like to be a son. And I realized right then and there, I had been walking around this world with the heart of an orphan. Y'all need to ponder on that a little bit, what that is to be an orphan. To be abandoned and not wanted. And had this crazy effect on my life. It was like overnight, I was like, so this is what it's like to feel like a son. And it was a feeling that I'd never experienced in my life. To be fully known and be fully accepted and loved no matter what I did. And that melted 48 years of hatred with my father. And then my father told me his story. His story made me cry. Because this story was terrible. I started thinking about that movie, The Shack. Like, where do we want to stop this blame? Where do we want to stop blame? Do we want to go back to Adam on this one or what? We just stop it. We just take accountability for our own actions. We all have to realize that we have a part in this. We have a hand in whatever it is. Because when we're victims, we don't have any control to change our life. But when we start to take ownership of our life, now all of a sudden, now I have the control. Now I have the power to change. And so, about a month prior to that, I went to Easter service, and I was one of those creasters. Yeah, I was one of them fellas. I'd show up every now and again, but I was a creaster. Because I didn't want anything to do with the church. Like I said, the worst people I ever met in my life were Christians, and I didn't believe a word of it. And this guy, Mike Beal, walks up to me and says, "Hey, we got this men's group. Why don't you come? It's on Saturday mornings. We call ourselves the Saturday morning slow cookers. We all like cooking and get together and share the word." And I said, "Okay, I'll show up." Talk about that group of men that you can truly be known. And in my own arrogance and pride, a year earlier, if I would have looked at these men, I would have been like, no way, casting judgments on people. But they ended up being the best group of brothers that I ever met. So that Saturday, fast forward a month or so this Saturday I had made this big confession, and I go there, and so we meet every Saturday morning. There are 3 things that we're all accountable for. What was your sin struggle? What was your time in the Word? And who did you share Christ with? Yeah. And you got to, and so here's the deal. You can either half-ass that, pardon my language, and give partial truths, or we can truly be known. And when it came my time, I said, "Man, I haven't been truthful," and through my tears, I just laid out I've been addicted, I've been this and that, and just weeping. And when I looked up, there was 10 guys standing around me praying for me. Praying for me. And I was like, man, I got to get some Christian counseling on this one. So, I go to Southeast there in Louisville, which is a big church, and they got a lot of resources. It's a wonderful place. So I typed online there, and I gave 3,000 words, and I had about 10,000, but I fit it into 3,000. This little old lady calls me up, and I just unloaded on that poor lady. It was terrible. Anyways, they hooked me up with this fellow named Tad. Said, "You need to talk to Tad Douglas. He's just a little bit farther down the road from you than you, and I think he has some wisdom that you might get from this older fellow." So I met with Tad 3 times and started talking about my story, and then he said, "We got this group here at church. It's called DDG, Developing Disciple Group." I said, "Me? Developing disciple? You know what I've done? Man, don't I need to shower up and get cleaned up?" I said, "Don't worry about that. Show up." So at that point in my life, this fella calls me up out of the blue. I hadn't talked to him in 35 years. His name was Jimmy Bell. Consequently, his brother was the one that raped my sister. And I had a vow between God and I that if I ever saw his brother Jonathan, I would kill him. And it wasn't even a question about it. I was just going to commit homicide right there. And this guy calls me up, and I ducked this call. I didn't know the phone number, and I ducked it about 5 times. And then one day, I accidentally answered it. He said, "Hey, John." We chatted for about 2 minutes. He said, "Man," he said, "the good Lord," he said, "wanted me to call you and ask you a question." He said, "Do you understand the power of true surrender? Do you understand the power of true surrender?" And I knew his story, and he had it worse than any of us. Talk about getting tied up in the woodshed and beat and leaving there overnight. He had every reason to be angry and bitter. And he chased that demon. And he accomplished all these things in his life. And he bought the farm that we lived on, and he burned the place to the ground. And he turned it into a hunting refuge. And he had all the financial success that he wanted. And he lost it all. He lost his family because of his addictions and his anger and his unwillingness to surrender. So I don't know, man. See, I ain't got a lot to say, but you understand the power of true surrender? Say, oh yeah. Had no idea. True surrender means relinquishing the right to be right, valid, and justified. It means surrendering these things like that I feel like I have to do on my own. I got to give it up. I got to give it up. And I still don't know what I still don't know what true surrender feels like. I'm getting closer every day, but I still don't know what it feels like. I'm getting closer. And then I started getting into the Bible, right? I started reading this book. And this book was given to me by my mom. This book was given to me by my mom. She wrote something in it for me. And this book was on my shelf for about 10 years. Finally, I pulled it down and I started reading it. And I started in the New Testament. I got to Ephesians. Man, what a good book Ephesians is, boy. And Ephesians, I have my cheaters on me here. But Ephesians 1:5, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasures of his will, to the praise of the glory of his grace, by which he made us accepted and beloved. It's like, man, you mean I was chosen before the beginning of time? Like somebody chose me? Means all these lies that I've been telling myself this whole time, like I wasn't worthy? I wasn't worthy of being a son or a husband or a friend? Like all of a sudden, what? Then I get to Galatians. Galatians 1 verse 10. And this one right here will stick with me for the rest of my life. For do I now persuade man or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. A bondservant is a slave or a person bound by service without wages. And I was like, ooh. I've been an approval seeker my whole life. What would happen if I just stopped gaining people's approval? Because here's the thing about approval seeking, right? Most approval seekers, we have a fear of authority figures, right? And here's the thing about that. You think authority figures are people like Mr. Darren or your boss, or your mom or your dad. It goes way deeper than that. Whenever you want anything from anybody, then they're an authority figure in your life. So here's what happens with that, right? So then you always ultimately have this fear of abandonment. And that's the worst thing you've ever experienced in your life, and abandonment's worse than death. And so then you'll do whatever, you'll be whatever in order to not be abandoned. I was persuading men. And when I stopped wanting things from people, and when I started getting into the Word, and I read this, so now I'm in this next group, it's called Getting Equipped. It's a weekly thing, and we read through the Bible. And I read John. I read this yesterday. Figured it was very pertinent. John chapter 5, verses 39 through 40. You search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. You have found eternal life. and they are which testify of men. But you are not willing to come to me that you may have eternal life. It's not good enough just to read the book. It's not good enough to read the book. We've got to figure out how we apply it in our lives. It starts by being committed. Listen, I know schedules don't permit all the time, but if you commit yourself to a group like this, be committed. Be committed. Be committed. Be a man of your word, because it will change your life. And when you do that, you kill the generational demons. And when you kill the generational demons, it has an effect on your children and your children's children and your children's children's children. But if you show up, and if you're not surrendering, and if you're trying to do it on your own, and if you think you're fooling everybody, guys, everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. So what I've learned along the way is confess your sins. You're not terminally unique. Stop running rackets. Be committed to a group of men where you can truly be known, and live a life of service. Because when life of service, then you find love. And let me tell you, love is not a feeling, it's an action. It's a verb, fellas. Live a life of service. Understand that in the Lord's Prayer, he said, give us today our daily bread. Jesus didn't say, hey, hook me up with my issue for tomorrow or next month. Just for today. That's all I need, just for today. And if you can start living your life one day at a time, if you suffer from anxiety like I did, it goes away. And you live for today. And you support your community. And you're committed to a group of men. And you don't miss it, because that's what it is to be a man. You live up to your commitments. And we're changed by the renewing of our mind. Thank you, guys.